Excellent. So this is the distributed firewall interface. So folks had asked, how we manage this thing, how do you manage all these different firewall rule sets, right? And so functionally what we're doing here is, this is where you would manage all of the firewall rules that were necessary for your infrastructure.
Even though there were multiple firewall icons on the slide, that's just so it looks cool? Yeah,
what we're really saying is that context awareness is really the next evolution, right? It's not like a bolt-on feature function. It's kind of where our firewall is evolving to, if you will. So what we're going to do is we're going to log into the flow monitoring tool. So I've logged into the web client, which we all know and love. Hopefully this will be moving to HTML5 here soon. But what we're going to do now is we're going to start up this our HR application here. So I'm just going to create a monitor session for my HR servers. And so I have 3 servers here that comprise my HR application. This is a 3-tier app. I have a web app and DB. And functionally what I'm doing is I'm loading this application into the application rule manager. So let's make some clarification. Application rule manager comes with NSX. Okay, this is a product that's actually built in. So when you buy NSX, you get application rule manager.
And this actually existed several years ago. Right?
It existed, not necessarily several years, but it existed in 6.3.
Okay,
it was first introduced in 6.3.
Okay.
Okay. So this version is the automated recommendations. If you want to take a look kind of where we had ARM last time, the last network field day with Wade Holmes, I'm the less handsome Wade Holmes.
Okay.
Right? He's like.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. So
the beholder.
you can. He goes through kind of where ARM was in 6.3.
Okay.
So we're going to actually have this application run here. So what we're doing now is, from the source, we're collecting the information that's going on from this application. If you are using a real-world application, so I've actually run this against a SAP HANA. Actually installation that we have in here internally. I can actually run it against modern day applications. This isn't something that only works on Linux-based boxes, right? That only need 500 megs of RAM and stuff like that. This does work on enterprise applications. So I flip over here to my HR system, and we managed to hack all you guys' HR systems. We found out how much you guys made.
Wait, who makes the most? Hold on.
But let's just make sure we clarify something. This isn't pesos, man. So you can't even afford
awesome.
like a trailer with this kind of cash, right? I think 750 grand only nets you like $27,000, right?
It's like double.
But what I'm saying is yeah. we took your information over here. Looks like Greg's Ethereum mining is not really netting him a whole lot of cash.
Not much more than me.
But since this is a demo lab,
electricity bills?
I do need to generate traffic for this application to start actually capturing the flows. So I'm just just running the query against the database to kind of get some information to pop in here. And it does take a couple of minutes for it to actually start gathering this information. This information is stored on the host, and then it's pulled to the host on a short interval, anywhere between 2 and 5 minutes. So what we see now here is, and I'm going to stop the collection because I've actually got the information that I want to see here. It kind of moved back. When we actually do the monitoring of the actual application, let me make something clear. Do not monitor the application for 5 minutes if the application is a billing cycle application. I can't tell you which app, how long you need to monitor the application, but what I will say is this. The application rule manager will collect up to 1.5 million flows over a period of time. It will start to prune flows after it hits about 100,000 on a host. It'll take the last 10,000 or the oldest 10,000 and start pruning them out. So if you have a very chatty application, you're still going to have to do a little bit of homework in terms of what your application is. So I know that my application, I generated my traffic. This is a demo lab, right? But what I captured was a couple of things. So I captured some IP addresses, and everybody knows we're all networking folks, right? We all know what the IP addresses of all of our servers are. And I also captured the service. And if you see out here to the side, I'm also capturing that not only is it HTTPS, but it's also running TLS version 1.2. So I can actually I'm actually getting layer 7 data, layer 7 context from these different flows. I caught 5 flows as I was doing the demo and getting things in. And all this stuff is cool information. But IP addresses are not cool. I need to match this stuff up. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually analyze this data. So Application Rule Manager, since it is NSX, has a connection to vCenter. It will attempt to make sense of what those IP addresses are. If they're virtual machines, it will map them to a virtual machine. It will also take the services that it finds and attempt to match them to services that it knows about. In this case, we pulled in 2 services from those 5 flows. Here's the other thing. You see the number of flow count? It went from 5 to 3. Application Rule Manager will deduplicate non-unique flows. It only pulls in and will only write rule sets based on a unique flow. We took those 5 flows, deduplicated them down to 3. It created 2 security groups automatically. And this is what I was talking about by ARM recommended security group 54325526 Blue Hut. If you don't know what these are, you can make changes to these and you can actually select what you want to do from here. So I could actually click on this, click the edit button, and I can actually change the name of the security group. This is our ability to do manual intervention. But let me show something that I think is really cool here. And this is our ability to actually, maybe I don't necessarily want to, I want to go in and edit my rule. And I don't really care to monitor basically layer 7 services across HTTP. If I click on this, we can tell that this isn't actually layer 7, right? Because I'm actually looking at an application identification. It's not showing me a port or protocol. So I'm going to go back and I'm just going to say, I'm going to go ahead and edit this. I'm going to remove the service. And I'm going to go back through and I'm actually going to go and I'm just going to look for HTTP. I'm going to scroll down here. If it doesn't have the letters app in front of it, APP, then that means it's not a layer 7 service. So I'm just going to select the layer 4 service, bring it over. I'm going to change this rule here to NFD rules. We hit OK. And when I'm done, I'm just going to publish. I'm going to create a section name. So I'm actually going to create and say HR app. I can insert the section. I can insert my rule sets in this section above or below any of the sections that already exist within the firewall, and hit OK. I get a nice success message here saying at 5:52 p.m. it did it. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go back over to the navigator and go to the firewall rule table. From the firewall rule table, we'll now see that there's now an HR app section with our firewall rules already in place. Now, if I didn't do any manual intervention, I could have just published these rules and I'm done. So this is how we're automating it and making it easier. In earlier versions, we would have had to go through and pick all these things. We had to create our own security groups, would have had to do all of that. We would have had to do all of that information before. And now what we're doing is we're bringing it back and saying, okay, we're going to come back and make this a little bit quicker.
Do you have to run that every time you spin up a new server? So if you just, for scale up, you need to put up a new web server to handle load? Do you need to run the tool again, analyze the traffic, and then add it to whatever? No. So from that perspective, what you could do is, if it creates a recommended group, say for your web servers, there's a couple of different ways that you can actually. So you can change the criteria on the security group to be a dynamic criteria. So right now, this is going to statically include these virtual machines in here, which means if any other virtual machine meets this criteria, it's not going to put it in place. Okay, but you can change the actual security group and say, if the virtual machine starts with the word web, right, or some combination of something close, that I want to immediately drop that virtual machine into that security group. So you can do that now with the distributed firewall without any of the ARM piece. You can actually create a security group with those dynamic criteria.
You could use a security tag and basically say if a virtual machine comes online, so if you spin it up through something like vRealize Automation, you can actually tag the virtual machine with an existing tag, and that tag can be used as criteria for placement into that security group. So the policy automation from that perspective is already there.
It's just a question of
just a question of how you actually take advantage of it.
So that when you scale, it inherits the right tags.
Right.
And then it
Like
inherits the
folders,
right policy.
Things like that, and
Yeah.
folders.
Yeah.
Any attribute.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is pretty cool and all, but what I want to do now is I actually want to go and move this rule down, because it's fine that I went through and found everything, but the proof is in the pudding, right? So let's actually go through and actually block traffic. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn off these rules. And now all traffic to this application should be blocked. And we should be seeing connecting right there. You can see that it's showing down here that this application is no longer making a connection to its to the web system. This means that our block rule is going to work. What we should be able to do now is, if I recheck these rules and I hit publish and go back to my application, the application should come back, which means that my automatic rules are working, and it means that I was able to capture all the necessary flows for the application to function. And that the block rule that I now have in place, the per app block rule, if you will, means that that block rule is actually going to function the way it should function, which means I can go back through and I can make that much, much more more granular. I can say only my HR systems, right? Because that technically what I put in there was basically an implicit deny at the bottom of, say, a firewall. I turned it to block, okay? So this functionality does work as expected. So I'm going to turn that one off real quick, because we're going to mess around with a few other things. So let me pop back over to the slides real quick. 5 minutes? Okay. Oops. Let me move on here real fast. So we're going to get right into the RDSH, and then I'll do the RDSH demo, and then I'm done. Tom, can I get 7 minutes?
6.5.
6, okay. All right, let's go.
Negotiation.
Good negotiation. All right. RDSH. So why do we do RDSH? If you actually take a look kind of at our use cases for how we can block traffic, web to web, we can block it really easy, right? I create a security group called web, and I can actually say web to web can't talk to each other. I can do the exact same thing for VDI desktops, okay? I could create a security group and block all traffic between all of my VDI desktops. Very, very easy. One rule to rule them all, right?
Which is something that should never happen, right? We
we
don't want people hopping between desktops.
Okay, there are use cases, okay? Skype for Business. I know, it has a P2P client, okay? We know that it has those things. But for the most part, VDI systems shouldn't talk to other VDI systems, right? If one is compromised, everybody else can get compromised just as fast. So this is how we've handled VDI to VDI, basically segmentation. This already works. This works with everything. RDSH is a much, much different animal. So there was a question on terms of how do we actually handle this? RDSH servers, right? So this is how we're doing this. RDSH servers, our rule sets are written on an IP address. RDSH servers have the same IP address, okay? So when a user logs into those systems, they are logging into the exact same system, which means when I write a rule that says Bob over here in HR can talk to the HR system, but Alice over here in the engineering group can't talk to HR, the HR application, I can't write that rule because IP address 10.10.10.10 is the same IP address as Bob, who's allowed to get to it. So how did we handle that? What we did was, in the firewall rules now, when you run the vSIP commands on the host, you will no longer see the IP address for these systems. You will see, this is connected to Active Directory, you will see the SID of the group from Active Directory now, of the group that's allowed communications to this. So now we're extending that tuple, that context out, to allow Bob to gain access to the HR application and disallow Alice to gain access to the application. When you click on these security groups, you will actually see the users that were logged in to to that system. So let me show you real quick since I only have just a couple of minutes.
Literally.
You have 4 minutes and 40 seconds.
Awesome.
Not even.
So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new section. So what we had to do to make this work, okay? We had to create this ability for us to be able to look at the security group of a source, okay? So we're going to use Active Directory groups as the source. When we do this, this is done at the section level within the firewall. I'm going to what's called enable identity at user identity at source, which means the distributed firewall will now respond to Active Directory group IDs that exist within this firewall rule set. I'm going to create 2 firewall rules. One firewall rule is going to have the security group, and I'll show you here in just a second. We're going to select this out of here. I'm clicking the engineering group, and I'm going to click the destination as the HR server. So what I'm going to physically do is I'm going to go in and say that I don't want Bob or I don't want Alice to have access to the HR application. I only want Bob to have access. So now I have the engineering group. I click on it. I don't see any users that are actually logged into it just yet. When I click on this, I'm going to add in the security group.
Engineering group is an AD.
This is a security group, and inside said security group is the Active Directory group. You have to put the Active Directory group into a security group and then use it as the source. Okay? So I've added these systems in here. Almost done, Tom. Drop this down here to virtual machine. I'm going to take the HR web system and add it in. Okay? I'm going to make this so that Bob is able to access, but Alice is not. I'm going to publish these rules now. When I open up my documents here and I log into an RDP session with Bob, and then I open up an RDP session with Alice, Bob's logged in, Alice is logging in. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to go and attempt, these 2 people are logging into the same machine, and I'll show you how it's the same machine here in just a second. And if my pod will actually authenticate and get things up and running, that'd be great.
Wake up.
Yeah, wake up. We are going to bring this system online. Come on. Sorry. All right, cool. It's coming up. Bob's logged in. Both of these systems are set to, their Internet Explorers are set to go to the HR application. I'm going to open up the HR application on both machines. We should see now that Bob will have access to the HR system. Bob can see how much money Drew makes, and Alice has no idea how much money that Drew makes, as she shouldn't be able to. When I click on this group,
You could just ask Bob.
put up the interface here, and it's supposed to update for me, so give me a second. It will update as soon as a TCP connection is made and a login user pops up here. But what we can see is that I am accessing the system from the same server, and I'll show you that here in just a second, but we can see that Alice has no access to the HR application, but Bob does have access to the application. What you will see here in the UI, when it updates, is it will actually show you the last logged on user into the security group. So it does take a couple of minutes here for it to show up here, but what we are seeing though is that the enforcement is actually taking place. It's just the UI hasn't refreshed to show us the information. But what we would see when we clicked on those is we would see the IP address is the exact same for both users, and we would see what time they were logged in. So now I can see user ID and user session, and I can block at the user level and not have to worry about whether or not it's the IP address. Make sense?
It does.
Can't block it, the
User level
until they've
authentication
logged in.
integrated with the
What's that?
remote desktop.
You can't block
but
the user
in the
level
NSX
until they've logged
agent,
in at
not
least once.
in the
Okay,
It's not
a TCP session has to occur
Yeah.
for us to make the translation of who the user is.
Okay.
What we functionally do is we stop the login, we verify context, and then we allow the login.
We can
to
do
finish.
some of this today with PANs or with other firewalls that do L7 app IDs, but I don't have to.
But you don't necessarily have to, and the only thing that you need to do this is you just need the guest introspection. You still need guest introspection. Okay, I still need the service VM for guest introspection deployed, and I still need the thin agent for guest introspection installed on the RDSH host.